Welcome to Cooperville.
Do you know what's fun to do in Cooperville? Pack up your shit and get the fuck out!
Listen. www.welcometocooperville.com. Who the fuck says www anymore? I can't even say it. www. Stop that. The Welcome to Cooperville podcast. On demand anywhere quality podcasts are available. And some places where cheap podcasts are available.
And the local gas station has some.
Subscribe, get updates, feel better about your life. Welcome to Cooperville.com. Check one.
Welcome to Cooperville. Make sure you use a coaster. The wife gets upset when we leave rings on the tables.
What's going on, guys and girls? It is Cooper and the Welcome to Cooperville podcast. Kyle Roeder is my guest today. Very excited to get to conversate with you outside of our former career paths. Yes. The trajectories that we were once on have led us into the basement of my home.
Hey, I'm happy to be here.
And Kyle what was your official title? And your last official title with the Eau Claire Police Department was like boss man of Twitter.
Well, it was still a good question, actually. It was. I think it was kind of self-defined at one point, but it originally started as community relations officer, which morphed into public information officer, so I called it the community relations / public information officer.
You called it king of Twitter, let's be honest.
Hey, I tried my best.
And you succeeded. And now there's a lot of things I want to talk about with that facet of it, because I think, at least on a local level and a follower of social media, how the interaction between police departments and the community has developed into some really strange, I wouldn't say strange, I mean, it may be strange from my perspective, but there's comedy and there's memes and what used to be when I was growing up, like people of authority. Like I can't imagine, the first time I got busted for like underage smoking back in like 94, that guy was not on Twitter posting a meme about like, hey kids, don't smoke cigarettes. But it's a different world we're living in, I think, with social media and with relations between police departments and the community. But what I want to start off with is trajectory into that career path. Was it something at a young age when a movie you saw or the community you grew up in that you're like, this is something I can see myself being, in a police officer role as a career?
Yeah, I mean, it was real life. It wasn't in the movie. So I grew up in Chippewa Falls, not too far from here, right? So this is, not quite my community, but I didn't stray too far from home either. Growing up, my mom was a dispatcher, 911 dispatcher for Chippewa Falls Police Department. Mm-hmm. And, typically the people that you hang out with outside of work are the people you work with. So a lot of her friends, a lot of the family friends were police officers. My uncle was also an officer for Chippewa Falls. And I just got to listen to the stories that they had. Mm-hmm. I got to really see who they were as people. They would pull up, they'd stop at my house when I was outside playing. They'd pull the squad car into the driveway and stop by to chat. And that's really what policing's about. And they were doing that in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, when police stepped at her house, that's a story for a different day. But no, I think that's exposure at a young age. And I think because there's a lot of different perspectives of that profession, I think, depending on how you grew up, a lot of it depends on how your parents viewed authority and how they viewed, the police department. But to have, I think, that kind of access and to see them on that level, especially in the 80s, because I see, I don't want to say a curtain, but a wall between like, okay, they're the police and, we are the citizens, and there's not much commingling outside of, unless like in your situation where you have somebody who's in the department and has some personal relationships there. What was done with high school, I'm going in full-fledged, high and tight haircut probably.
Always, yeah. I've really always had a plan. I mean, yeah. I'm probably to a fault. I try to have a plan, and I had a life plan. I knew I wanted to graduate high school. I wanted to go on. I went to college. I went to UW Eau Claire. Did that, my 4 years criminal justice, and I was out the door. So, actually at that time, I was down to the plan of, in between my freshman and sophomore year, internship with the Department of Justice, DCI. Between my junior and senior year, at the time, it was a 400-hour police academy. So I was able to do that over that summer. So I became a certified law enforcement officer prior to my senior year of college. And UW-Eau Claire hired me for their police department right out of academy. So my senior year at UW-Eau Claire, on the weekdays, I was pretty much going to class and then working as an officer on weekends and the nights there. So I had that plan, right? And then moving forward, buying the house, is getting married, having kids, and never kind of thought I would be doing what I'm doing now, but it took me down a pretty good road.
The thing that strikes me about Kyle, and the first time that you and I had a meeting together, or we ran into each other at a function, you never struck me as, like, I guess, stereotyped police officer guy, because I grew up with a lot of military in my life. I have family who's in the military, and there's a stigma almost with police officers that they kind of have an attitude, very masculine, testosterone driven, obviously, especially if you go the route of served in the military and then went into police work. But you never struck me as that guy. You're conversational. I never felt, I'm gonna say intimidated by you but I felt like we could have a conversation instead of just me being like, man, I think I don't think I have anything illegal on me. Like, these keys are kind of sharp in my pocket. I mean, you transitioned into a position, like you said, be kind of in charge of community relations, and then enter the Twitterverse, which is a rabbit hole for a lot of people. But there was a huge change from my perspective watching social media and following the police departments, especially when I was in radio, because we all tied in together. We did a lot of events and stuff. This progression of stiff, I think maybe stiff is a good word, very informational, very to the point, but not something that you would chuckle at, not something you would go, hey, right, that was pretty clever, or something that I think the average citizen how they would speak, how they would talk about snow conditions, or they would talk about traffic issues. All of a sudden it started to, and I think from, my Twitter feed, it changed when you kind of took over and started to interject some humanality into what the police department, this official, the official Twitter of the Eau Claire Police Department, was all of a sudden being conversational and all of a sudden interacting, and all of a sudden you felt like it was a tangible thing instead of just this beacon of information that came out.
Yeah, that's what it is, right? That's always been my view of really what I want to do. And I've sat in on interviews with aspiring police officers, and everybody says the very first, why do you want to be a police officer? I want to help people. Well, that's really what we want to do. It's not about the authority, and sometimes officers put that out there, right? The officers that came out, early in the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 90s they came out of the military. They might have been looking for the next closest thing in the private sector, public sector, but outside of the military as a civilian. And that's changed. We have people that are getting into this because they want to be communicators. They want to be problem solvers. They care about their community. So what I try to do with the community relations role is I wanted to get away from being reactive to news stories. That's what it was. It was TV news typically, or the Leader Telegram calling us up and saying, hey, we read this in the police reports. What can you tell us about it? And, we would give them more information, right, or give them some sound for what they needed. I wanted to take that to, hey, what's really going on? Who are our people? What's the human side of what the officers are doing? Right. What's going on out there? And I knew that from growing up that these officers have great stories. Not only the stories of the humorous things that they've seen, but boy, they put their heart into this, man. Not that there's not other jobs that do that, right? But they work weekends and holidays and nights, and they give up so much, and they still have a sense of humor, and they still have the ability to connect. But unfortunately, when people need the officers, they don't see that side because it's an emergency situation. Right. It's a medical situation, or it's a criminal situation. So there's not a lot of ways to show that unless you know somebody personally. And that's what when I took a hold of Twitter, and now they're using it, Facebook and Instagram and other things. But it was a way to reach out to the community in a different way, and it was. it was helpful not only from community relations, but we would get private messaging on there that were, people would ask basic questions, is it legal to have, alcohol in this certain park, whatever, right? They wouldn't call 911, hopefully. They wouldn't call a 9 emergency
That
number.
is not a situation where you call the 911 hotline. That's for emergencies. Like, if I'm at Owen Park, can I have a Sixer down here?
We could do a whole show on what people call 911 for.
We may get into that. We may.
But it really wasn't. It wasn't about that. It's like let's connect. Let's be a part of the community. Too often, the community feels like they're here and we're in a different spot. We're driving around with our windows up. We're going from call to call, and unfortunately, too many police departments don't have the staffing now to get out and do the community things that they need.
Right.
I was so fortunate to have a position, and Eau Claire offered that position to us, and now there's actually 2 there, which they see the value in that community. Every officer should have the ability to get out in their neighborhoods and not just go to the neighborhood meeting and get back in their car, but get out and talk to the kids like they did in Chippewa Falls when I was there, and go to the playgrounds and go into the schools. But when we staff at a level of respond to call,
Right.
you're not able to do that.
I think everybody's got, and even my mother, who was, I don't think she ever got, maybe she got a speeding ticket at one point in her life. But everybody has that. Anytime that you see a police officer or there's one behind you, the world stops, your heart, even if you're not doing anything wrong, you become like oversensitized to this. And strangely enough, this just happened after I went and picked my kid up from after school care. And I know all the guys in Altoona, so I wasn't like, but there's still like this, okay, 10 and 2. Okay, my phone is down. Okay, that's down there. Okay, and see, everybody has that initial reaction when they see a police officer. But I think that there has been because of social media, if you're not doing anything wrong, you're like, oh yeah, that was the guy that they put up that meme about, the snow we had last week, or the situation that happened and they made light of it. And we'll talk about the karate meth dog naked guy at Walmart, which really could
be any day.
Really could be any day of the week right now. But there's definitely been, I think, a softening of that, at least locally. On a national level, and we'll talk about that further on in the podcast, there's a little bit of off balance. There's a little bit of maybe it's because the stories are skewed one way. But if you watch news still, there has been a lot of focus now pushed on the things that you mentioned about officers going out into communities and talking to kids. And I watched one, I think it was the other day on the nightly news, so on a national level, about an officer who befriended a young child, and nobody showed up at his birthday party, so the whole police force was there, and now all of a sudden this kid from a poorer neighborhood sees himself in the future joining the police force because he wants to make that kind of difference. But the social media aspect of it, who let the reins off? It seems like there was such a brick wall between the police and the community outside of events, outside of going and doing, night out on crime and these things that have been implemented to really bring the community and the police force together. But to open up those lines of communication where officers, and especially people in your former position, to talk to the community like they were human beings, like they were their neighbors, like they were their friends.
Yeah, that was a change. I don't know that it was ever like an intentional thing that that's what policing was trying to be, right? Policing has to be so many things. You have to really know a lot of different things. You don't need to be a master of any, but you have to really have,
knowledge
tools,
of all,
knowledge of everything. And people expect so much. So I think there's a burden that, boy, you need to be doing these things. Even now, we see comments. We do put something out that is supposed to be educational, but it's humorous. And you'll see the comments. You're wasting my tax dollars. You're wasting time. Why do we have this position? Why are you doing this? Well, that's preventative.
Do you think that's a generational
proactive
thing? Do you think that's a generational thing? Do you see that those kind of comments may come from an older generation? Because that is a huge sector now of social media is an older generation now jumping on social media and getting able, having the ability to put their 2 cents in. Because it feels like maybe the millennials and especially Gen Z is got a completely different vantage point of things. I can see an older generation, a baby boomer generation that would look at that and say, like, how come you are on social media posting this funny thing about turn your lights on when it's raining? Is it a generational thing, you think, those kind of comments, or is it across the board?
I think it's two things. I think generational, one, but I think it's also people just like to be trolls. They like to they like to have their voice heard as long as they don't have to be in front of the person saying it, right? They like to poke and prod because even if they don't have knowledge, and really that's unfortunate because social media is such a powerful tool, but it's gotten a bad rap because that's where a lot of people go with it. They go into the comment sections, or they put things out there. You can't sort out whether it's true or not, right? So there's plenty of police-related stories where people put something out that the police did, and there's no factual basis behind it. They'll totally make up stories or
out of context. There's a lot of out of context.
Out of context. Yeah. Everybody has two sides to a story, and the perspectives are different. So it's something that is an absolute must for departments now. Just like businesses, you better be on social media marketing and interacting with customers and customer service. Some do it much better than others, and police departments are the same way. Some do it better than others. Just having a presence doesn't mean that you're doing a good job.
Right.
And too many places they have a presence. And the difference there is, do you have somebody or people behind the scenes that give your department that voice, right? A central unified voice, but something that gives you that relationship with the community. And when we have a free platform to reach people and be retweeted or shared, sometimes to millions of people, in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, people see that, right? And that turns into real life connections, real phone calls, real face-to-face contacts. And that's what some people don't get. They look at policing as really what it's not. Now, policing, we're here to uphold laws or protect people, whatever. But it's about community relationships and being there in times of need. If people can't trust you because you haven't built a rapport with them ahead of time, even if it's online social rapport, we're putting ourselves in a bad position.
You got infamous, interchangeable.
I'll take what I can get.
There was a phone call, and it started locally, and there's some other stories I want to talk about that have started here in our community, and all of a sudden they blow up because of social media, because how fast things can transfer from person to person, also from network to network when you talk about TV coverage or radio coverage. But you got a phone call sitting at your desk at work from a scam artist, which took you kind of global.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell that story, because if you haven't heard it, because this podcast is also global, except it's not available in places where they don't allow explicit material. So other than that.
It's like everybody else. I was at work. In my old position, I carried two phones. I had a work phone. I had my personal phone in my pocket, and I looked at it, and it was a scam number. I could tell, right? I used to go and teach about scams. We tell people, just don't answer the phone, hang up on them, right? But I was standing there, and I said, you know what? I was talking to my partner at the time, and I said, hey, I'm gonna answer this, and she actually says, hey, let's. I'm gonna record it. So it was her idea. So I went and I answered it and started talking. If I knew it was going to go where it went, I would have probably tried a little harder. I probably didn't put my best foot forward as far as my acting skills there. I'm not getting any gigs that way. But we put it out there as an educational piece, showing that this is what's going on,
right.
and I think we're over 14 million views on it right now, and that's on our Facebook, our old police department Facebook account. Not to mention the other places that picked it up and did their own posts. That some of those have millions as well. To the day I was leaving the police department back in July, I was getting phone calls from people all over the country that were. I don't know what it was, but they were finding me, seeking me out, calling my desk saying, hey, I just got this call. Either what should I do, or telling me a funny story about, hey, this is what I did, right? So if I'm reaching people out in California, or I'm reaching people wherever it might be, or I'm reaching them to the point where they're going to tell their, grandparents, say, listen, or showing this and trying to educate. That's what we're trying to do. So it's not like we're just screwing around trying to put out funny stuff. There's an educational value to it as well.
Right.
Never thought it would go 14 million views. We had some success earlier. We had a duck crossing video that had, I think, gone over 2 million or so on YouTube. And, we've had some successes, but that's never our intention. And I teach social media now to law enforcement as well. And I say, we're not looking for the viral post, right? That comes along with it. You're looking for the relationships. You're looking for the education. But you have to do things that are creative and a little bit different. And it's been amazing how far law enforcement social media has come in probably the last 5 years.
This video goes viral quickly. It seems like there was a very short period of time between the first time I saw it locally and then the time I saw it nationally. GMA, the video was everywhere. It's weird watching that process happen because when you see it locally, obviously that was probably a couple of days after it originally happened, and then you see it nationally a couple of days after, and they see it on a different national level a couple of days later. What was that like for the department? For your department at that time? Because I'm guessing you were called for interviews. I'm guessing you were called in to do a bunch of different talk shows. But obviously you have a job to do while you were there. You had a community relations job. Big distraction. I mean, was it just like what is happening right now? I'm famous now.
Yeah, no, I mean, not. I don't think as much as a distraction. Fortunately, some departments don't have the position that we had, where that was one of our primary things, is to be responsive to media. So when we would get calls on that, and we did, we had calls from Time Magazine, Huffington Post, USA Today, all of these places, as well as TV from all different states, and then the national level. To me, because I was so invested in social media, I'm like, that's it, right? This is, and it's not about the viral post so much, but it's like, wow, we have done something that really wasn't that amazing that others have done, but somehow it caught on, right? And sometimes we don't know why things go viral. Sometimes we don't know why things
Trust me, there's a lot of things out there I'm like, why is this a thing?
Yeah, absolutely, right?
Whatever my kid watches, why is this a thing? Why is this kid opening up Disney toys making $20 million a year?
Yes.
Why?
Yes.
Yes.
If only we would have thought of that, right?
I just feel bad because I could have done that. Like,
yeah.
Watch me open up beers all day. I'd make a show out of that.
I haven't seen that one yet. Maybe we could try that one, right?
After this show, we're going to start a new idea here. But it was such a cool thing. It was funny. It was, everybody gets those phone calls. Everybody has to deal with that stuff. A lot of time they're asking me if I want to join some sort of pyramid scheme, like, hey, how can you make $20,000 a month just sitting at home? I'm like, opening Disney toys. I don't know. Is this what this phone call is about? Guy from Denver. And George Stephanopoulos called you what? Kind of, sort of smart?
Pretty smart.
Pretty smart. Oh, you're pretty smart.
Yeah, that's my Twitter bio now. George Stephanopoulos called me pretty
was
smart.
Was it pretty comma smart? Yeah. Oh, it was pretty smart.
Well, that's a good question.
George, hey, we'll tweet at you this podcast. But it's really cool to see that is one of those facets of social media when it blows up like that. Locally, you get to see like, wow, we're on the map now. We have a lot of things that put this community on the map. There's plenty of things. I mean, there's huge brewery in Chippewa Falls. There's big music festivals. There's all these great things that this area does. But when you have that kind of story go to that level, it softens the relationship, I think, between police department and community, because you're like, hey, you know what? These guys and girls are going through the same things that we go through. I think really humanizes the police officer and continues to make that relationship stronger in this area.
And why not use that platform, right? You have a free platform, right? We're always talking about budgets in government and policing. You have a free platform to go out there and make a difference that way. When we can put out a reach. Now, I would do presentations for elderly people, and there would be 10 people in a room. I'm getting that same scam message out to 10 people face to face over an hour, or I'm hitting 14 million people. And then whoever else shares that beyond, so we know that number is exponentially bigger than that, by putting out something that maybe is humorous. We've done that on a smaller level with the simple emoji tweet on a slippery day. Leave spacing between vehicles. And using emojis instead of saying today it's very slippery. Let's put more space between us and the vehicle ahead of us. That too many places do that. Right. Too many places. We this last year for 4th of July, the hey, fireworks are bad. Instead of a tweet, a press release, a 4-page press release saying that that's not what people.
Because all of us are waiting for that press release to come out about the dangers of fireworks.
When's that yearly 4th of July press release coming out? Right?
Yeah, you just got to change the date.
You've got fireworks emojis, just throw them up there.
So 15 years, then it was time, and then opportunity presents itself. How hard was the decision to get out of law enforcement and become a teacher?
Yeah.
Because we were talking about this before we started recording, before I hit the button. When you do something, and in your case even more so, I mean, I always knew I was an entertainer from a very young age. I wasn't any good at it. But when you are in something, when you have at a young age, for you more formulated a plan and got to where you wanted to be. For me, just kind of fell off a couple of cliffs and then crawled back up and ended up where I knew I needed to be. Making that change, contextually, there's some similarities, but to make a change out of this career that even you mentioned in the open, as a child you saw police officers and you had your plan all written out. How difficult was it to make that decision?
It was difficult. I always thought, hey, I'm going to retire from this agency.
Right.
I had dedicated a lot of time and effort, and made a lot of connections. And sometimes I think that we miss out on the connections that we have within a community. As in what you've done, you've made a lot of connections. I've made a lot of connections, and that goes a long way. When we miss out on that if we don't have that continuity with the person. And I just kind of knew that we were rotating positions after 5 years. I had been extended twice to 7 years, which was unheard of.
Right.
And timing and opportunity, I say, came together. And when there was an opportunity for me to go out and teach and really train new police officers, which I was passionate about getting the right people in the job to do it the right way, I took the opportunity. And it was hard. If I could have stayed doing what I was doing for the rest of my career, I had a lot of plans and goals. My wife will tell you, I've never told anybody else, but exclusive here.
It is. You're here first,
exclusive,
people. Breaking news.
When we talked about it, I was in tears. I was emotional.
Yeah.
This was, I don't want to get all Oprah on you here, but I loved what I was doing.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. I loved the community events. I loved the people. So it was tough. Now I've transitioned, and I'm seeing another side of it. I'm seeing that I can still be involved, with law enforcement, with really the people that we need. When I started in policing, we had over 300 candidates. The last time I heard, they had 35 people that wanted to do the job.
Wow.
And that's for a job where you start out making over $25 an hour, and you have retirement benefits, all that. We need to find some people that want to do it. We're not trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel, and that's not what's happening by any means. But we need to make sure we're doing a great job training the new people coming in, not only on how to do the job, but how to handle doing the job emotionally and physically, to keep themselves mentally healthy and ready to go.
Where do you think the reason for that decline is in interest? I mean, how much does the perspective of, if you watch the news is generational. People get their news from so many different places now. It's not just we all sit down at 5 or 6 and watch the news. But how much of that is people who maybe had that same childhood experience, or maybe had a plan, that become fearful, or maybe they get into a relationship before they start to get into academies, or go into training or go into schooling for it, and you have a spouse, or you have a parent even at this point that, again, you watch these stories, because for a while there it seems like it was every day there was a different story coming out of. A lot of this was major city stuff, but still there were some smaller town things that happened. There's a legit chance, and there still is, of tragic things happening. But do you think that has something to do with it, that people see the things that come on the news and they go, I want you to be able to go and do what you want to do, but there's a real chance that one night you go out and you're on patrol. There's one night you go out to this one call, a domestic turns into something much worse, or this situation turns into something much, much worse and much more tragic. You think that has driven down the numbers?
I think so. I think that the people that really want to do it are still setting themselves up to do it, right?
Right.
But I think people that maybe hadn't thought about it, and one of the things we did in recruiting, and a lot of agencies do, is we're not looking for the people that have always wanted to do this. We're looking for people who have life experience, maybe in other areas, that want to come in and bring that experience out there and to the job. I think that's a part of it. I think generationally, the motivation, the commitment level, and I like the millennials and the generations after, but it's different, right? I mentioned before that the people that kind of came out of the military, we had a lot more military that would come into the job. That's not the case. It's not you have to be a big, rough, tough guy doing it anymore. Now you're a problem solver. We have a lot more females coming into the job, and there's more diversity. There's more real, actual problem solving than used to be. And they always problem solve, but it used to not be on the forefront. It was it was a physical job, and now it's really more of a mental job. It's difficult for people to get through the training.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the physical commitment. You have to be in good physical shape. There's state tests that you have to keep up on. People, I think, sometimes think we just get a car and a gun and we go out and we, and that's not the case, right? Most of our officers have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. They have education that continues out throughout their whole career. Every year we have mandatory training, but then people are getting certifications and things. It's quite a commitment. And then when you look at some of the news stories, you look at just even locally, although we have it very well here, right. The comments from people, when something would happen on a national level, the people that would relate that, there's over 800,000 police officers in this country, and when somebody would either screw up or the perception was they screwed up,
right.
A lot of times they didn't. It was, their training, how their training was. That would come back on us locally, and people would, be saying things, chanting things. That wears on you, right? You're out there trying to serve your community and honestly do things. I've never met a police officer that's out there for like this big power trip. I haven't. It doesn't exist because what we, at least with our department, we go through such screening. Not to say things can't happen and people can't change and slip through the cracks, but when you go through, a psychological evaluation and you go through a polygraph where they go dig into your background, and if you lie about anything, you're out. We get some pretty good people in the door. So, and a lot of that is people's backgrounds just don't meet up. They think they can do the job, and they can, and they just can't meet the background requirements too. So a lot of difficulties there, but we're still getting the good candidates, I think.
Right.
I think departments are still getting the good candidates that want to do the job for the right reasons and want to serve their community. So that's a good thing, but you see a huge number like that shift. It is concerning.
When you now are in the position of teaching, the next generation of law enforcement, how different is what you are teaching now from what you were taught 15 years ago? Obviously, there's the basics. Know how to drive, cuffs. I mean, the basic things are still there. The structure is still there. But how different is what you are now teaching to what was taught to you when you first got in?
Well, we just look at pure numbers. Back in 2001, when I think it was 2001 when I went through the academy, or 2002, we had 400 hours of upfront training, right, for our academy. Now we're at 720. So we've nearly doubled the training. More is focused on victim care. More is focused on mental health. We have the communication piece that we really do more role playing, more. It's not just sitting in a classroom and being fed information and hoping you retain it. Now it's practical application on all levels, not just on the driving course or in the shooting range. And that really shows the shift from the job it has been to the profession that it really is. I mean, it is a profession where you need to know a lot of things, and you need to know them quickly. There's not time for most things to go and look through a book and see how to do it. So you better have the intelligence to think on your feet and be creative and be able to communicate and bring all those together, and people are going to be able to say, well, I know police officers that don't do this and don't do that, and don't do, right? But there's a lot of things that all go into that. Every situation is going to be different. So, we're getting good people in there, but the training has changed. It's a new focus. We're seeing, even locally here, before I left, we're seeing stuff that the general public doesn't have a clue what happens in Eau Claire or in Altoona, or absolutely don't, because people think what they see on Facebook, Twitter, what we're putting out, that is a small piece of it. When you have a department that is taking 25,000 to 30,000 calls for service in a year, now those aren't all high energy cases, right? But there are a lot of cases involving guns. There are a lot of cases where very easily could have resulted in an officer-involved shooting, which, in the last several years, we've had way more than we ever had in the first years of my career. That's not because the officers are trigger happy or they're getting to a point where they're acting too quickly. It's because we're presented with these bigger threats, these greater threats, these drug issues that are leading to some type of psychosis. So, I meare things going on, and it's real. And we have the right people and the right training to do it, and we are fortunate here that we have some community support, but a lot of places don't.
Right, and it's you mentioned drugs, and there's a lot of different levels that I want to touch base on here, because I think there is a far extreme, and I think there is a lot that is going on, and I don't want to say unbeknownst to the community, because I think there is some knowledge that there is some crazy shit going on in certain areas. But for you, from the teaching standpoint, and even reflecting back on officer standpoint, there is a lot of change that is happening, and it's happened over the last couple of years, especially when you talk about marijuana use, when you talk about confusion about CBD oils, public perception of those particular drugs. Recently, I think it was late last year, when the city, now it's $1 fine for your first time getting busted, where marijuana specifically, a big change not only in public perception, but also in legal perception. I have some friends that are in the CBD business, and right now, I wish I would have gotten in ground level on that. But there is a lot of preparation now with the cultivation laws that have changed, with the way things are altering in the state, with the way things that, frankly, like it or not, eventually it is going to be legal. You can have an opinion on that, however it is, but these are just going to be the reality that the public has to deal with, no matter what you think of it. According to the 2016 election and the questions that were asked, the majority of people who voted are like, yeah, this is likely one of the least of our concerns. Like, how difficult from your desk is it now? You can't teach a fast and steady law of this is illegal, this is not, these are hardened criminals. We're letting people out of jail for possession, which is how overrun jails are with some silly things. How difficult is it for you to try to teach on a line that continues to move?
Yeah, policing is we're kind of the face of the so-called criminal justice system. So, we are the ones that people see the most and really take the blame for everything. And the criminal justice system starts with our politicians that make laws that most are ambiguous. Many officers really can't interpret because they're so convoluted, and they change so often. Even when we look at like the carry conceal laws and things, and our job, and many people, or at least the perception from our end as officers, were like, many people would just blame us for that. We don't make laws, right? And the reality is, and I tell the students this, like, you may not even agree with the laws. Your job is to uphold the laws. So either you're doing your job or you're not. And we're right. Things are changing. They're moving along. CBD oils. I remember having conversations like, what's that? I'd have people call, what's the legality on this? I had a heated conversation with somebody before I left that wanted to know all the ins and I can't tell you, right? Because things are changing so rapidly. Different states, different areas have made changes. In Eau Claire, that's one of the things that's great about, media, $1 fine. Well, the fine you're going to get is about $130 because of all the fees that are added to it, right? So, the same with, your speeding ticket that's, $213. Well, it's like $30 of that is actually the fine, and the rest goes, so there are other pieces. And the point of that is that something where we never had the officers that we were out like looking, right? We were looking for the person who's back in the park smoking dope. Now, if we stumbled upon that person, would we enforce it? Absolutely. Because whether we agree with it or not, that's what the law says. And, but I think sometimes, when we were running in Eau Claire, which is, roughly 70,000 people, and then you have all the people coming in for whatever other needs, traffic, their hospital, whatever, we get the people that be like, hey, the police, they've been, following us or what. We have 6 officers working right now for probably 100,000 people in the city,
Right.
That's probably not the case. And marijuana was kind of one of those things. I think that, really it's on the books. It is what it is. If you're caught with it, it's a violation. Once they legalize it and it's not a violation anymore, then it's fair game. But until then, we enforce what we enforce. And that's really what we have to stay on top of. And that's why policing is difficult, because it changes all the time, whether it changes through the laws that are enacted or through Supreme Court decisions at a federal level, a state level, appeals court decisions. We have to keep up on all of those. It's not just like, here's the law, go and take care of it.
I imagine from even when you were in the position of officer to now teaching, I remember being taught. We used to have books, kids. They were these big textbooks, and you had to learn things, and they were printed 30 years before you got there, and obviously they added some pages on the end. But to teach a situation that is not, it is historical, but it's a moving history. Like we know the history of set situations. It's always been like this because it's been like this. How does that translate when they get to a situation where they are, hey, I'm going to throw the number out there, next year in 2020, marijuana possession, recreational use is going to be legal. Obviously, they'll put numbers on it. They'll say, well, it has to be this much, and you can't be, carrying around a trunk load full. And which is, the state will have a lot to say with that, because there's, those potholes that you have as you drive out to the school. Those are going to be fixed, people. I'm just saying, because I'm going to be the first one to say, I know where you can put some of that money right out there on KB, trying to go get my kid, and it's a crapshoot whether I'm going to lose a tire or not. But I imagine getting out of the field, how fast does that information travel down from, the legislative level down in Madison or wherever the changes are made down to a local level? I mean, because you could have a law change on a Tuesday and have an officer out that evening and have somebody that says, well, I pay, apparently that guy pays attention to social media or follows the laws. How quick is that line of communication between changes in laws and all of a sudden an officer who's in a situation where he has to deal with, well, this is legal or no longer legal, or you have this much and it's only this much you can have? It's got to be a challenge.
Yeah, every jurisdiction is going to be different on how that works. We would meet every day for a briefing on every shift, and really, if something came out, it was in our briefing, and hey, this is new today. This is how we're going to do things now. We had a great city attorney's office that would keep on top of things, legal updates and memos and things. And that's why it is difficult, that you can't just, get fixed. You don't just get fixed in the spot like, hey, I'm a police officer now, I know everything, and move on. It's ever changing, and you really just have to go with what's there.
The thought of having to go into a job every day, and not every day, but to know that you go to this briefing from what you were trained, taught, if you have longevity for the last 5, 10, 15 years, well, it's been this way. Oh, by the way, today it's going to be different, It's
absolutely. I mean,
adds to the stress level.
One of the big things not too long ago, right, is how to search a vehicle. You used to be able to search a vehicle if you arrested somebody in a vehicle, and you had fair game to search the vehicle. I remember when the Gantt decision came down that says you can no longer do that unless, right?
Yeah.
And that's now the law, and I mean that's what was decided. That's how our system is there, but we have to adapt to that. I think too often sometimes people think that police are it's like a personal thing with us.
Right.
Hey, if the speed limit's 55 or the speed limit's 70, that's what it is, right? We deal with it, and we're flexible. We adjust, and that's sometimes we would run into the one person who was the expert in that area. As I mentioned, I talked to the guy who called and wanted to know all the legalities on CBD oil. I said, I'm going to find him, talk to the legal people I had, and it's still up in the air, and I can't help you there, right? We're not experts in everything. We have to know a little bit about everything, and we'll try to find out. But, those were the people that had the one like goal in life to like catch you up in something wrong.
You said it wrong. You're an officer. You're an authoritative figure. How big is the meth issue? How big is the meth issue that we're unaware of? And how are officers being trained now to handle those situations? Because I'll even open that up, because I want to say meth is a thing of the past, because it's not. But meth is like the starting point. Things are just seeming to pile up. I mean, there's fentanyl now, and I didn't watch the whole story, but I saw something scroll across the screen as I was on my way out today that said drug that is 100 times more potent than fentanyl. And here the things we hear about fentanyl are like, if you touch it with the wrong, an open wound, all of a sudden you could be dead in 5 minutes. How bad is this getting?
I've never been in the drug unit. That's never been my expertise. But what I will say is that the information that we know from crime stats and whatnot is that it's not the issue of simply meth. Okay, It's the issue of people that need meth, that need money. So now they're doing the home break-ins.
Right.
Now they're going to any of our local retail, places, and they are doing crazy things. They are stealing things, and then they're reselling them. They're making that money somehow. So crime, we can't look at it as, it's a meth. Somebody's on drugs. Who cares if they're on drugs? It's affecting everybody. It's affecting you in your neighborhoods. If your houses, are getting broken into, your cars are getting broken into. It's
your stuff's getting stolen off your front porch.
And it's shoplifting. So now the prices are, raised because they're making up for the money that they're losing. You're looking at some of the craziness that people are, the things that are happening because of what they're doing. It's a serious time. And then when you get into the fentanyl and things, the exposure of that for officers, our policy, our training went to that, you need a second officer now, because if you ingested or if you had contact with it, that officer was the one to provide, potentially life-saving efforts on you. We used to have to worry about, are we going to get shot? We need to see the person's hands.
Right.
People wonder why officers are paranoid, maybe, and why they may not be as friendly as they want them to be on a traffic stop when you are only doing whatever.
Right.
Well, that's why, because our screw up in a day, and this, I know this kind of sounds cliche or whatever, but our screw up in a day could be life or death. It really could.
Right.
And if we don't know what we're doing, we're not trained, we're always going to err towards our safety side, because we want to make sure that we go home, and we have families. So, I think that's the fair thing, right? That we're out there. So, it's a big deal. It really is, and it's more than a lot of people probably want to believe, because it may not be directly affecting them or their family, but it's indirectly affecting you. I can guarantee that. And
maybe this is more of a father to father, husband to husband question to ask. We're trying to navigate through this world, and it's so different than when we were growing up. I don't know when to have the conversation, because I know the news will be on, or there'll be something that comes across, and my son has questions. You want to keep them in the bubble. And I think, when we live in this community especially, we feel like we're safe, we're okay. Obviously, as fathers and as mothers of smaller children, you don't know when to have that. Hey, you hear stories on the news, or you read things, or you're on social media, and you're like, 8-year-old gets, is found with this, or 5-year-old. And these are things that seemingly aren't going to go away. Our children are going to eventually grow up in a world where pot isn't demonized as it was maybe when we were growing up, or even before, when it was like, the hippies, the Woodstock, and look with it, and then pot led to LSD and all these other things that maybe weren't factual at the time. But now we're in a day and age when they have to be factual. The meth stats are factual. The fentanyl stats are true. Heroin and all these other things that are out there that we like to protect ourselves from, especially in a smaller community. How do we approach that conversation with our children? Because we don't know when that right time is. They're not, that conversation is not being interjected into the classroom. But you do have to realize, and this was something I had to, not say to come to Jesus with, but I was just, wow, my child is going to 3rd grade with another kid whose parents are doing meth, or they're doing things that are dealing with fentanyl, or you want them to be kids, and you want them to not have to worry about a world that can be crazy at times. You want them to see the beauty in it and be driven and go and chase their dreams and stuff. How do you think you approach that conversation with, as a parent, dealing with these type of issues?
That is a tough one, right? Kids grow up at different, even though they're in the same grade and the same age, they grow up at different levels based on their experiences.
Yeah, their environment.
And
totally.
you're absolutely right that people who are in our children's classes, they're having much different world than our kids are. And one of the first days of school this year, my son got kid threatened to stab him in the neck with a pencil and then go home and murder his parents. Okay,
that is not how you want the first.
This is second
any day
grade.
Of any school. Jeez.
Second grade. That's pretty specific, right? It's pretty specific ideation of what's going to happen. How
That's
you're
not
going
video.
to do
That's
it.
not video game shit right there. That is not from playing Fortnite.
And so that's concerning, right? As a guy who I dealt with, in my kind of prior life, prior to the public side in policing, I was a detective who handled child abuse investigation. Just going into the houses and seeing, you don't know what's going on at your neighbors' houses. Not your neighbors specifically. I don't know if they listen or not here, but
I have a couple of ideas, but we'll talk about that off the air.
But you go into these places, and again, I think that unless you're in a job that forces you into those houses and in those situations, you have no idea what's really going on at a much higher level. It's not to scare people away, because we still are a good community, we still are safe. But it's something that really is frustrating. And how do you approach it? I think the biggest thing is more so of really monitoring and understanding. It scares me when I see good families, or seemingly good families, good parents, good upbringing, and things go off the rails. And trying to figure out, where did that happen? What was the cause behind that? That's not something I have an answer for. But the best thing I think you do is you really, as a parent, you want to hang out with your kids as much as possible. You want to do things with them. You want to keep them involved versus allowing them just to stray off and not knowing what they're doing. Make sure when they're on YouTube, they're watching the people open Disney packages versus, whatever else. And it's not to keep them in the bubble so much, but it's really just kind of keep them close to you. The right answer, I wish I knew that. If I had the answer, I'd be doing my own podcast with that answer for people.
And making much more money than this podcast is currently pulling in. No, I think, and we have, I want to say, you and I, you maybe more so than I do, but I have a great relationship, especially here in this town, with the officers. We worked hand in hand with them. We did a lot of great work with them. We have personal relationships that we've built on that. So I think that exposure, simple passerby exposure, my son doesn't have a fear of seeing the K9 unit out, because we know Officer Tony and we know Max, and you came in and shook his, he's fearless, but he knows he's protected, because he has, we've kind of put him in a position where that this is why this officer is here. We had a former neighbor who no longer lives in the house behind us, but there were some bad things that were happening in that house and on a drug level. And we had former chief of police here, Jesse James, who's now representing our community, and Officer Tony, who has Max, our canine dog here. We're at that house on a pretty consistent level, and this is in a smaller town than Eau Claire is. So you talk about 6 officers on. We have one and a dog, hopefully running around somewhere, Max. But they would then come to our house, and there was an incident where a door was kicked in, but logistically speaking, you can't kick in a door when the glass goes out. He came over and asked if we had seen anything, and my son probably shouldn't have, but he crawled up in the truck. But so I think we have them in feeling comfortable with the law and the difference between law-abiding citizen and somebody who's strayed from the path. But it's a very scary situation that I think you can only protect for so long, and it's tough to gauge when that happens. I think you said it right when you're keep them close to you in a perspective of know who their friends are. Know, obviously, if you have kids and they do play dates and stuff like that, you have a good idea, at least on the visual, of those parents and who those parents are and kind of what they stand for. A tougher world, I think, for parents now.
Yeah,
from a
I
different vantage point.
wonder if each generation had this, right?
Right, there was something.
There's something, right? The difference now is the information flow coming in.
Way back in the day, it was watch for dinosaurs, and now it's meth dealer behind your house.
Take cover. Right? Find a cave.
Jump in the cave.
Yeah. Now, but now internet, pop-up ads, TV, and it's not just, there's so much out there. It gets overwhelming, and there's access, which is great. I mean, it can be used to, the advantage of a lot of businesses and people, but it also can be a very negative in our society. So I think that's something that, we'll see how things evolve or devolve from here on out, but I'm guessing every generation had their concerns. It just has to be adjusted to 2019 level. There's
less to worry about. I'm a firm believer in the fact that even given technology, we do live in the greatest time ever, where you have access to know anything at any moment that you need to know it. And I think our kids, especially in that generation, in Gen Z, will never know a world where they didn't have that. They didn't know the Encyclopedia Britannica or, chisel markings on the cave, or had to deal with things like polio. I mean, obviously there's a measles issue that
Mine don't even know what commercials are.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't even know what this
Netflix
is.
And they just, fast forward.
I don't understand.
What's fast forward and rewind? It doesn't.
There's no cables running into your television.
What's going on?
How do you not have music on? But I think you're right. Every generation has a different thing. And now ours have really the keys to the unlimited amount of knowledge, and you hope that knowledge, finds its way down into to do some positive and to even grow that network. We talked about a lot of the bad things that are going on, and I know there are just some funny things that happen. There are just stories that come across, and sometimes they come out of Florida, and we make fun of Florida, even though we don't like to be there when it was February. But there's been just this array of stories that have come out that you shouldn't laugh at. It's not okay. You shouldn't be methed out at Walmart and have your son take his shirt off, and then there's a lady doing karate with her shirt off, and the dog steals cornbread. But these are the kind of stories that I think especially when they go on and they go viral. And all of a sudden you see, I have an aunt and my mom and everybody who lives out in Northern California, they're posting these kind of stories like, oh, this is from where we grew up. And this is really, there has to be times when you were in your old position, or even now when you read these stories, you got to laugh and just like, people, come on.
It's the greatest show on earth, watching reality. And, some people miss out because they don't get to see the behind the scenes. What I used to do, policing, we saw the reality of whether, I guess if that's reality or not, maybe not, right? Maybe that's on the other end of the spectrum of reality, but it was things that were real, that were really going on. And, you can't make these things up,
no.
Right? If you wrote a script and said, hey, let's put out a funny movie, you're not going to come up with probably the lady doing karate and the dog stealing the biscuits. It's not going to happen.
No, because they would think your movie was like a farce movie, or it was like, oh, they're trying to do a little knee slap thing, like, oh, this doesn't.
Absolutely.
Oh, it really happens.
This happens, right? And this happens. But you have to look at it, if you want to get down to it, there are people, there are mental health issues, there are drug issues. There's so much behind that. But if you go into, when we talk about in the job, if you go into that with everything has to be completely serious, you can't have humor, you're going to burn out real quick. Because you do see terrible things. You see these real people. You actually, beyond that headline and beyond that Facebook post, these are real people that you're going to deal with or have dealt with before, and that this is affecting more people in their life. But it's there's some strange things out there. Absolutely.
My favorite one, I shouldn't say favorite again, I know, it's not good. Don't drink and drive, people. That's why I do my podcast from my own house. There was a story, this was a couple months ago, and I haven't had a chance to bring it up yet. Guy gets pulled over for DUI. Somehow between the pullover and officer coming to the window, he jumps into the passenger seat and claims, I wasn't driving, it was Ryan Reynolds. Like Deadpool happened to be in the driver's seat. It makes for good comedy because I think that we look at it from a Hollywood standpoint.
Right.
You go, who thinks of, this is not good? And then, plan of action. I mean, all of a sudden, you have a plan. Here's my plan. I'm going to jump in the passenger seat. And then I'm trying to imagine this call back to dispatch. Male, 32, whatever, claims that Ryan Reynolds was driving the vehicle. As a person that's on the other side of that, I would just think that you would just laugh and be like, oh, well.
and you have to roll with it. It's something down the line you do laugh about. But when you're in that situation, you are dealing with a real person. So,
right.
And of course, Ryan Reynolds isn't going to say he was there, right? Why is he going to implicate himself, right?
Like, you were really fast, dude.
And he does have the gin company, Aviation Gin. So, I mean, it ties
I suppose,
together.
I suppose.
You put the pieces
everything
together.
is full circle now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Damn it,
so,
Ryan.
So, and there are a lot of people that would want to be riding with Ryan Reynolds. So,
by the way, Ryan Reynolds can afford a driver. He can afford a car service. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. He can.
Absolutely, yeah. But those are the things that make the job fun too. Not that we're dealing with somebody. I think that was a 6th offense OWI,
yeah,
right?
So yeah,
part of our big job is education, so that people don't do these things, right? So people don't get killed or injured. But there's a light side to these things that, man, there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of different people. There's a lot of people that think that, I can be smarter than the cops. Well, you maybe can, but not when you're a .26, right? That's
Ryan Reynolds was here. You should have seen him. Full costume.
Maybe have something scripted out a little bit better.
Plan your life better. But there had to have been moments in your 15 years that you were at the end of a day or read a headline and you had to chuckle to yourself. Just like, come on, people.
Oh, all the time. And things would come across. There were so many things that even with the police department that would come across that I would want to post, and we just could not do it. There was you were
close though. You thought was there.
Some departments they push it a little bit farther. I never pushed the limit. I don't think. I think I was pretty not even close to the line of going over at times. But there were things that, we want to put this out there. But you have to balance that out. Like, are you trying to humiliate the person? Are you trying to educate them?
Right.
What are you trying to do, right? And sometimes you just have to put, in my opinion, put these out because you have to have people see, you are doing things out there, and this is such a unique position, unique job, what we're seeing, what is going on in our community. So there is, even if it's not educating on a specific point, it's educating the community. Hey, what are we doing, right? What's going on out there? But there are stories. I mean, that's one thing you can walk away with at the end of the job is, you have all kinds of stories. Most you forget because one trumps the next.
And I think nobody wants to be that person. Nobody wants to be the person who, Kyle goes home to his wife and says, so yeah, there was a guy with 68 pounds of coke in the back of his, El Camino. And it busted today. Didn't think we'd know it. I mean, there's low rider, but nobody has a low rider in Eau Claire because have you seen the street conditions? That thing would bottom out. You're going to lose your suspension. It's not going to be any good. But there's so many different facets, I think, of law enforcement and what you're doing now in the educational field, training the next police force that's going to be out there in our community, that is really opened up in the last, I'd say 15 years because that's how long you've been in. And it seems like the stories of the bad, they're going to pop up. They're going to happen. There's going to be guys who either, like you said, make mistakes. The public doesn't understand that situation. And we never will, because you can't, unless you're watching the full hour special of something that happened, you're not going to get enough information in a snippet, or a lot of times on social media, all you do is scroll, you read the headline, and that's the information that you have. People don't have the time or the energy or the want to educate themselves fully on a story. But there has been a huge change in the way that the community and the police, sheriff's department, everybody seems to be like, okay, I think we're kind of all on the same team. We kind of all are fighting for the same cause, and that's to live in a town where we feel safe letting our kids go to school. We know that those schools are protected, and I think we also have our awareness is raised about warning signs. I think mental health is a huge thing, and we could have a whole podcast on that.
Right.
We're becoming more aware because we're communicating more, and I think that's something that people were either afraid of, or that line just wasn't there. There wasn't a way to say, hey, Kyle, what do you think about this? Or can I have beer at Owen Park? I mean, who knows where that story ends up if that communication isn't out there, or that person feels like they can't have that communication. Hey, is this okay? Can I do this? It feels like we're in a better place with that line of communication open.
Yeah, communication is really the number one tool that we have. People see, you carry a duty belt with guns and batons and handcuffs or whatever, but again, not to sound corny, but every day, everything you're doing is communicating. Right. And if you can't do that effectively, we teach that's your primary weapon, right? You get out there and you you sell yourself, you market yourself really to the person, because what you're trying to do is convince them to comply voluntarily.
Yeah.
The other pieces are rarely used. When they do, of course, that makes the headlines, and and then that's great. That's if it bleeds, it leads, right? So if there's something like that,
or if it's on fire,
there you go.
Too soon? No, I'm sorry. Neither here nor there. But no, I think you're right, because the attention span of society right now is about 6 seconds, and you get 6 seconds of a headline, and that's all you're going to read into it. And if it's not, hey, there was a story today about a person who was breaking the law, they complied with the officer, they were taken in with no incident, that probably happens more often than it doesn't happen.
Right.
That's not the story that people want to hear, though, because we are living in a reality TV generation. I mean, we're growing up on this, watching Cops and watching all these shows where you want to see. How many times did the camera crews go up with the cops and nothing happened? They're like, oh my God, this is going to be the worst episode ever. Oh, we got one. This is the one people want to see.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's there are things happening in every community.
Yep.
And there are things that people don't want to know about. So, being sheltered is okay sometimes.
Sometimes it's okay to be in Altoona. Kyle Roeder is training our next generation of police officers. I thank you for coming down to the cave tonight and hanging out and doing the podcast. And hopefully we can come back and we can have another topic of conversation.
All right.
I'm sure there's plenty out there.
Yeah.
I have a whole list of things that we should probably do.
Okay. Thanks for having me.
You can check out the podcast now. By the way, do want to let you know it is available on the iHeart app, so you can catch it globally on there. Otherwise, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify, and anywhere fine podcasts or semi-fine podcasts are available. We will catch you next week on the Welcome to Cooperville podcast.